Hi, this is Johnathan Tripp, and this is my submission for Computer Science 631 Android Development Environment Lab. To begin, let me give you a brief overview of my setup here. I'm using Android Studio 3.0.1, which is what I've developed the entirety of this application in. And for the Android device emulator, I am running a Pixel 2 emulator with Android 8.0, though the application I've created here at a minimum targets Android 5.0. While the emulator boots up here, let me go ahead and give you an overview of what this application does. I've gone off the suggestion from the assignment, which is to create a simple application to gather input from the user and concatenate these two input fields into an output field shown here at the bottom of this application window. When the user first starts the application, they're shown two prompts for first name and last name, as well as a simple text output of hello world. But as a user inputs text into either of these two fields, the output here at the bottom will change to reflect that. Here's some of the design code for this application, most of which was generated dynamically by Android Studio, as I just sort of dragged and dropped these UI elements around the page. You can see there are some layout constraints placed on these elements for things like spacing relative to the sides of the screen and relative to each other. The only real manual changes I had to make here were a couple of changes to the spacing between these elements, as well as the names for their ID attributes, so that I could access these elements in the code. To look at the logic code for this application, it's fairly simple. There are a few fields to represent these UI elements. The two user input fields are called edit text, and the output is a text view element. There are also two string variables to represent the first name and last name values that are gathered from the user input. And then within the code for this application, there are really two main things here. The first is that each one of these edit text fields implements what's called an add text change listener. And this text change listener has three methods: after text changed, before text changed, and on text changed. The one that I'm concerned with in this application is after text changed, which waits until a user is done interacting with the UI element to gather the input that they've entered, rather than something like on text change, which constantly polls for user input and could cause problems with the interaction with the application. So what happens is, after a user has input text into either of those two fields, first name or last name, this method fires, and the text within that input field is assigned to the first name and the last name fields respectively, and then the text of the output text view element is set to be that first name variable concatenated with the last name variable. So to see this application in action, I'll go ahead and run this through the emulator, and I'll pull that up. Something happened with Google Play Movies there. And we'll just wait for this application to load. Okay. So as you can see, when the application first loads, you can see the first name and last name prompts, as well as a simple hello world output. If I enter my name in these input fields, and then hit enter on the keyboard to finish entering text, I can see that now the two values that I've inputted have been concatenated together and shown here as output. So some of the resources that I referred to for this project, I've referred to the Android development documentation for the text watcher, which again is that listener that implements these three methods, which I used after text change to gather the user input from the edit text elements. And then I also referred to the documentation for the edit text elements just to see how to interact with that element, as that's something I was not previously familiar with. But something like the output, the text view element, is something I have had some experience with in prior minimal Android development that I've done before. So that's it for my submission. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed.